Okay, so this is our fourth official ClashCast, I believe. Those are the numbers. Those are the ones lining up.
That's right, and I'm your host, Colton Cruz.
I'm your other host, who is equally as hosty, Wyatt Garland. That's what they call me. They've always called me, unfortunately. I wish I had a cooler anime name. Today we are talking about the Lost Gap generation.
Yeah, so it's kind of this idea I came up with about, everybody...
Founded through, research principles.
So, I'm calling it the Gap generation, and what I mean when I say that is kind of the generation of anime that kind of fell into the cracks between kind of the end of the big three, your Bleach, your Naruto, and One Piece going into its time skip kind of, kind of dark period, I think we'd like to refer to.
Oh man, God, so many
Fishman Islands and whatnot.
It was a building period, and something that big like One Piece needed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's, and obviously One Piece is still going and whatnot, but
it was time for the collapse. I mean, there was three giant flagships, there was a lot of weight, and it was inevitable that something would start to happen, and it all started to happen with Bleach.
And then a generation, I would very much define it as I think a big generation of fans kind of that's what got them, or that was what was mainstream when a lot of people came into the anime sphere.
Yeah, and we were so accustomed to that sort of level of content, the amount of
balance.
Content. Yeah, it's okay, well, I can do pirates, ninjas, or, traditional Japanese samurai magic demon crap. So, you had a good range. And then, there was this period of time in between, say, I don't know, from, when was it, that was 2005 or 6 into now. It's about a decade, where it's different.
There's a good decade there.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, because going into 2000, I'd say 11, 12. That's where we saw Bleach to finally the Hueco Mundo arc had been going for I think 4 years at that point.
It was dawning on everybody,
right? And then it moved into the anime being canceled, but the manga was slated to be canceled, but then it kept getting kind of The cancellation kept getting postponed. We saw the end of the Hueco Mundo arc and the loss of the major villain that was set up from the about second arc in the show.
Yeah, there was issues.
And so that had been kind of dragged out, and then it started on its new thing, which a lot of people had kind of lost interest in. One Piece, it had been really hot, kind of had moved up to a very clear the top selling manga of all time.
Yeah, so it now had sort of plot armor, so to speak. There wasn't anything that was ever going to change One Piece's sort of historic status now.
Right, but because it kind of when it got to that point, it brought in a lot of new readers to the old content.
Right.
And really, I mean, it really relied on the volume sales of the printed books afterwards. So we end up with this kind of real drop in popularity and drop in content quality for shonen manga and anime by the same token. Mm-hmm. And I kind of I feel like we're just finally crawling out of that with some real mainstays of what the shonen anime looks like.
Because the thing that happened, I mean, you're getting exactly on the point. The thing that happened was you had the Bleach and the Naruto and the One Piece that fed so many people into this system, and then it brought in more people because it just got so big, it just got so popular, and then they didn't really have anything to feed that demand. There was nothing else at that level. Bleach sort of started to crack and fell first. Naruto, I remember the rumors of it ending happened 4 or 5 years before it actually did.
Yeah.
It was aware that it was going on its downward turn,
right.
And that was stretched out a little bit. And One Piece was its own thing. So there was all this space that was created. And then the sort of people that were creating this space left, so there was this giant sort of, I mean, it wasn't a power vacuum, but it was a sort of vacuum.
Yeah, and especially for the anime, I mean, the manga gets, like Naruto and One Piece, the anime is at such a slow pace, kind of, not even slow pace, but it's kind of behind in the kind of the content vacuum, and hunger for that content is a lot different than it is for the manga. I mean, the manga is a you get a chapter a week and that's the pace of it forever.
Yeah,
but
you're set.
The way anime comes out in seasons, especially the way North Americans, kind of get the content, even secondhand.
Exactly.
It was really strange. And then at that same time, we're seeing what is it? That's the same time period where, I would say we got one season of Attack on Titan,
Yeah.
and then we had a gap of it never coming back.
It was weird. The hype was
Yeah.
there, and the industry was trying to react to the hype, but they couldn't. They almost couldn't even catch up with it. And the exciting part about that really comes from the fact that we forget that Shounen Jump never had, anime itself never had 3 flagships at the same time before anyway.
Right.
So it was this historic, like, larger than ever interest in the market worldwide. It was different. It was new, so there wasn't an appropriate response to this giant vacuum that was created. So you've got these manga that happened and these anime that happened in this lost sort of generation that aren't bad per se, but don't sort of take the art form to a higher state like we're seeing now.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them, like, they didn't come out and do anything that was, I would say, like, for their time modern.
Right.
I feel like,
they felt like they were trying to redo Dragon Ball Z.
Right, yeah, so, like, some of the examples, we'll talk about is Toriko, Fairy Tail, and
Kenichi.
History's Strongest Disciple, Kenichi. So, like, just to sort on, like, Toriko, I know for, like, a long time, a lot of people discuss Toriko as, like, it's what's going to take the place of X of the big 3.
And that mostly came from Shounen Jump marketing it as that.
Exactly. Like, they really needed it to replace one. But I think, like, as we, like, because we were big fans of Toriko when it came out. It was new and fresh, and it was cool. Again, like, two people who had, like, kind of come into anime while the big 3 kind of, like, held the balance of power.
The art...
Toriko is exciting.
The art of Toriko found an interesting pace. I remember initially I was a little bit like, okay, but you always forgive manga's initial, like, sort of publication because it's adapting to Shonen Jump structure is a thing that it takes a lot of reaction from the artist, so the art's gonna need some time to fill the gaps, but it eventually found itself a nice, interesting style, very reminiscent of, say, like, Fist of the North Star, almost. It had a classical, all the characters are giant bodybuilding men, so, like, that's the idea. And it had this fun, original sort of character building thing. He'd bring in monsters of all different ages and like, aspects and aesthetics, and it was fun.
Except for female.
Yeah, but there you go. There is plenty of glaring flaws.
That was one of the things we kind of looked at is, like, what kind of new thing did it bring? And, like, the only thing we could really, like, figure out was, like, okay, it brought bigger monsters, bigger action scenes, bigger physically characters. Yeah, but, like, it wasn't really. It was kind of a weird mishmash of, like, a cartoony Fist of the North Star, Monster Hunter Hunter x Hunter. Like, One Piece.
It was very much a built concept. Like, it was so marketed and so, like, created to be digestible, ironically.
Right.
Like, because it knew what it was becoming. The editor who helped the manga artist for this clearly knew what it had the potential to do, but I feel like the art of it was rushed to that conclusion.
And I would say even more than art. I mean, like, story. I mean, like, what is Toriko about at its core?
Fine. Like, it was supposed to be about the full course,
right?
Which was exciting because it brought the raw adventure aspect that One Piece has of finding new things that weren't even aware of by the characters.
But I think, like, even talking about the art style Toriko has, like, there's not. What is Toriko really learning? Like, what is his character arc in the story other than, like, he's kind of gaining more power, but, like, the whole world he's in is kind of a joke, so, like, him gaining power, like, but the joke doesn't work to that extent where, like, oh, this is so funny because it's so ridiculous.
One of the biggest moments in it that kind of broke its fourth wall or whatever, or really just kind of, is when they fight the 4 beasts. I remember that fight.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they save, quote-unquote, the whole world. Very superhero Dragon Ball Z-esque, where it's like the Z-Fighters come together. It's like the 4 heavenly kings. It's like, they're such individual characters. Their sort of, like, Avengers style attack is strange.
Well, and, like, we never see, like, I don't know, the only stress we ever see on Toriko is in the moment-to-moment fight. There's never, like, a, like, overarching, like, wow, that really affected, like, his psyche, or his, like...
I think the biggest, definition we're both thinking is the hand. He, famously, I mean, spoilers, obviously. You put a spoiler thing in front of this whole thing, because we're obviously just ruining everything. But Toriko famously loses his hand in one of the earlier arcs, and it has this sort of depressive atmosphere on a very jovial character. But then he grows it back, and
in like a chapter,
yeah,
like,
which is kind
it's
of
very much that same rabbit hole of like a superhero death. It's like, okay, sure,
yeah, and that wouldn't be so bad as to say it happens again later in the manga, and that's when I kind of had to stop reading it.
Yeah, because there's no damage that
Yes.
Toriko is taking.
Yeah.
Like, emotionally or even physically.
Even when he loses his hand the second time, he kind of, like, takes it in stride, like, saying, oh, I know how to do this, I've lost my hand before. But then, like, I know he gets it back, and it's just so, like, oh boy. It's... and there are things that Toriko evolves into, yada, yada, yada.
Exactly,
There's
yeah.
story elements to it, and I want to reattack it and reread it just for the juicy fights, I'm not going to lie, a lot of good punching in there. But, again, this Gap Generation thing, it was drawn and made as a reaction to a vacuum. It wasn't made to do anything other than exist in that vacuum.
Right, and then, like we're saying, like, we're not trying to, like, pick on Toriko per se,
No.
we're just saying, like, it kind of fell in this, like, period of years where, like, it didn't really bring anything new and, like, refreshing.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the female thing, and we'll make sure we'll end on that. That's
right.
really one of the biggest examples of the lack of modern perspective Toriko just is lacking in. It doesn't... There's like one female character, I think in the anime, they add a couple more just to kind of balance it out because they know it's a big deal. But it's... The one female main character is a cartoonishly, like... done fangirl of Toriko himself, who is completely oblivious to the concept of girls in general, which is very...
So is the art, art, like...
I guess, yeah. It's just a very weak and sort of, like, lacking investigation of the concept.
Yeah, and just, like, I remember literally at the time being like, it's 2014, you can't have, like...
This,
like,
love-struck...
Like, you can't get away with, like, a mainstream shonen series that can't even represent, like... an attempt at, like, having female characters included and, like, being characters. Like, why isn't one of the 4 Heavenly Kings a woman? Like, let's be real.
Yeah, well,
like,
then they wouldn't be kings. You
okay.
could say rulers. I don't know.
Or you could just say kings and get over yourself.
You
like,
could do that. It's the thing is, it's like it's not hard. Like, it's
Exactly.
it's not a difficult thing. And that's what we're saying. It was clearly done... Toriko in general was written as a reaction to the vacuum. It wasn't really... It's not more. It wasn't art being put in a corner and having to come to a new conclusion. It was art that knew where it could thrive, and that's kind of the biggest problem. Is there was anything would have worked. You get the talent of the artist and the talent of the staff of the editing, and put anything into motion. I mean, come on, Toriko's a classic concept.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, like it's a monster hunter. It's a giant world food creatures. That just spells fun, and it is fun. We don't want to get away from that. It's a fun story, but it doesn't advance anything. All right. Speaking of advancement, let's pick another one in this Lost Generation. One that's probably, it's a shame because it had so much potential, but it's got to be Fairy Tail. I mean, it's...
Yeah, Fairy Tail. I remember reading Fairy Tail and, like, being pretty impressed with the first
Yeah.
couple chapters.
It's not... even in there, it's got some core... like feeling to it. It's not bad.
It does really well for a long time. It does really well, and it is really well arced out.
Yeah.
I think it just ran into that thing like I think he was looking at One Piece a lot for kind of how the world was expanding.
Yeah.
And same thing with, like, Toriko found the same problem where they're really trying to expand the world as quickly as possible, introduce all these new characters. Like, as much as the big 3 we point to as kind of, pillars of, like,
But they
great content.
They built it. They got there.
They built and got there, but they also had some glaring flaws as well. Like, and I would say, like, part of what makes these a Gap Generation too is, like, they didn't learn from the mistakes of the big 3.
Yes, they were just sort of regurgitations, and one of the biggest examples of Fairy Tail being just sort of, another story is the fact that, I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of reading Rave Master, but Rave Master is the manga that the artist of Fairy Tail wrote before Fairy Tail, and it is essentially the same kind of story. I mean, there's nothing... I actually read Rave Master because I remember watching a bunch of the episodes on Adult Swim a long time ago, or Like, I remember... No, what was it? It was on Toonami. Yeah, it was on Toonami. I remember
Oh.
seeing some episodes of Rave Master. I'm like, what is this? And I was doing some research in comic building myself, and it was related... It was the same sort of fantasy environment, and I read it. One of the characters in Rave Master is Gray in Fairy Tail. Like, they have the same thing. And he even... The manga artist knows this. He even has a funny chapter where he puts them both in the same universe, and he pokes fun at the fact that those characters are very similar.
Which is great.
Which is fine. And as an expansion of his own art, go ahead. Like, those are his characters. He wants to, like, carry the torch, kind of like Naruto does. Like, that's totally fine, but you can't say that it's anything more. You know what I mean? Like, there was a vacuum for that kind of fantasy pacing, and Fairy Tail found its pace. Like, there were some good fight scenes in that. There's some good moments.
I think like that's I think it just ran into the problem that like something like One Piece ran into. It just ran into it a lot faster.
Yeah.
It got to the point where it built the world so big, and then he made a couple messy choices about like, well, then I'm gonna like fast forward through time, and then also like introduce some alternate universes, and it just got really messy really quickly, and so we lost a lot of that main third. I remember like, I think it's like the second arc, it's just Lucy and Natsu, and they're fighting a wind wizard. Yeah, and like it's just down to basics. Like, he's a powerful wind wizard, and we're just having to deal with him causing some trouble. And like it just gets to a point where like anything but, like the stakes just keep rising too quickly, where it's like, well, if we're not threatening the space-time continuum now, it's not like worth our time.
Yeah,
like,
the tension needs to... The best part about One Piece is it kind of had so much... The tension was built so, like, slowly, because he was fighting, like, what is it, second or third arc of One Piece, he's just fighting people, like, that just want to, like, get money, you know?
Yeah,
like,
that are, like, giving up.
Exactly.
Like,
he's fighting low-level people, they're doing low-level things, they're not even on the grand line yet.
It's a slow burn. Like, One Piece very much... And I would say even the same thing with all of the big three. One of the big things they had going for them is, like, they really got their chance to start the way they wanted, and then grew into being the pillars that they were.
And then these ones in Fairy Tail...
They had to grow up too fast. Toriko and Fairy Tail had to grow too quickly.
Exactly. Too much was expected of them too quickly, and you can tell just purely from the character construction. I mean, come on. Like, Natsu is the simplest, like, most, like, Echo-built character ever. Like, motion sickness, like... he's got a fire attack, he eats things. His whole thing about eating fire and getting strength from it, it's interesting. Like, don't get me wrong.
Well, the dragon elements and everything, it's cool. It's
like, just standard. It's just standard.
And the thing is, we just lose those like those are good pieces of organization to start a series off. We just lose track of them.
Yeah. And he doesn't ever build on them. Like, Natsu doesn't really, like... I mean, I'm sure there's some moments here and there, but it never really, it doesn't really sort of... I forget when I stopped reading that a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would just say for me, like, I don't know, like, I never saw, like, I think there are a lot of times, too, like, in Fairy Tail where, like, you have an arc and you're like, oh, okay, that, like, Natsu got to this level now. And then in the next arc, you almost don't see any of the ramifications of the arc before in his character. Like, like, world and all that stuff, like, aside, like, but we never see, like, Natsu from the arc before the previous arc is the same Natsu. Like, like, we're not seeing, like, a character change happen and then deal with the next arc differently than, like, the previous character would.
And I get trying to keep a character simple, that way it's always relatable. I mean, Luffy is always going to be simple and relatable, and that's why he has strength, but he learns... Like, you can't say that after Water 7 and after CP9, Luffy doesn't gain a deeper understanding about his crew. And there's some moments where they do that in Fairy Tail, like when they go back and visit, is her name Lucy?
Lucy.
Yeah, Lucy. They go back and visit Lucy's family, and they go to help her, kind of, where they're there to support her, but it kind of, like, I don't know, it just doesn't... This isn't to say there's anything wrong with Fairy Tail. It's fun. It's enjoyable. I loved reading it. There's some great fights in there. I happen to love Gazelle as a character, the way he's designed and the way he fights and acts. I think
I love Laxus, same kind of thing. Like, there's great characters here.
Laxus is like he's so Don Flamingo. Yeah, like, I love his cocky attitude. He's got the jacket. He's got something to prove. There's lots of good stuff in there. It's just more of the same. It's not...
Yeah, and then again, talking about, like, making some more mistakes, too. Like, there is also just that same problem of, like, in Bleach, one of the problems we ran into was, like, well, if you're going to introduce a new character, you're like, now it's just another character we're adding to the list that we need to see the Bankai of. And until that happens, we like aren't satisfied. And the same thing happened with Fairy Tail as with just, oh, that character, we haven't seen like their ultimate thing yet. Yeah. So like we're just tacking that on to what we have to get to eventually.
Didn't really.
But like kind of after that, I mean, we run into not a ton of anime coming out that are like super mainstream for a while.
Yeah.
But one of the ones I wanted to talk about manga-wise was History's Strongest Disciple, Kenichi.
Yeah. Oh boy. Because that didn't really get much of an anime, did it?
It did. It get a whole anime. It's just really terrible. It's just really slow. The action's not there.
Right. Well, that's probably because they were trying
really
to stretch
slow.
it.
Yeah, they stretch it into basically just the first main arc where he fights his childhood friend, basically.
Right. Where they do the high school thing.
They do the whole Norse high school thing. Yeah. And then they did some OVAs recently where they really upped the action and stuff, which are pretty popular. But like Kenichi, I would say, is like got a lot of modern features in it as far as like we're getting a character that's very similar to like Deku in Hero Academia,
exactly, or even Saitama in sort of a sense. It has modern. He's self-aware.
He's not Goku,
exactly, and he knows he's not, and he's not trying to be. And those three things are fundamental in, say, a modern concept of anime. The reason One Punch Man has been such a slam success, even though it only has a spotty manga and one season out so far, is because of its incredibly modern characters.
Exactly.
And that's it. That's the reason. And History's Strongest has an interesting mix because he is such like a Kenichi is such a modern concept where he likes plants. He likes to water. Yeah. He has a thing.
I would say one of the things that makes it most modern too is it's humor. Like it's really spot on.
They'll do his comparison to the super over masculine concepts.
Right.
And that's the best part is the humor. They'll take these things that sometimes they talked about in Toriko with these insanely powerful men, but they'll make it a joke. They'll make it absurd because it is, especially in the martial arts like concept of everything.
Exactly, because I would say that's kind of like the tricky part of Kenichi. I think that's part of why it didn't become bigger than it did. Is like it kind of like it's kind of shonen,
right?
But it's also a little bit of a fighting manga. Like I think a little bit of that kind of took away from its ability to be a mainstream success, and then also just boobs on boobs on boobs on boobs.
The man,
which like I think it really is an egregious amount for something to become like the big
mainstream or aware of. And I mean, I know that that's kind of like you got to hit your fan bases, and that's part of.
Oh yeah, every like 3 chapters there had to be a girl fight to like keep those numbers up.
He would strip them bare, and I mean it's just ridiculous. Like we get it, it's funny sometimes maybe, but not even.
And it's interesting too because what was it? I remember like always comparing it to like because the art is so good in Kenichi.
It is,
and even the breasty art is like it's just like wow, the art's just so good. But it reminds me of like what was that horrible Wolfman manga where like he was super good at drawing too.
Gosh,
but then he was like yeah, and then I'm just gonna draw like an 8-chapter rape scene, and it's just like
oh boy,
you're a beautiful artist, but like you're really alienating
what else did
a lot
he
of people here. Akumetsu, which is really good.
Oh my god, yeah, and that also has some questionable scenes in it, but those are seinen. Those are intentionally seinen.
They're not comparable really,
right.
but
it is.
But I think Kenichi erred on that side of like being just a little too much.
I remember specifically when looking it up, it's described as a martial arts manga and an ichi. Fundamentally,
it's meant to be,
and that's part of its humor because it's the hyper masculine thing you get with. It's like like you lift a lot of weights, you got a lot of testosterone.
And then super beta Kenichi dealing with a harem, which is every Japanese
exactly, and
everything they want over there. And whatever. But
it hit a certain God, it had the right art and the right energy, but it just wasn't the right subject for the vacuum that was created.
And I think that's fair. I think in the same way we talked about Fairy Tail and Toriko being really pushed to fill the vacuum of the big 3, Kenichi really I don't think was. Like I think they were very aware of it being its own thing.
Yeah, and maybe his intention of keeping it ichi was to keep it out of those categories. I don't know. Like
good for him. I mean, honestly,
he had great numbers, and at the end of the day, these manga, like we talk about them conceptually like completely from our viewpoint as viewers and
Yeah,
makers
but like
of art.
at the time, it's week to week for them. Like,
and they're producing this. At the end of the day, I can go back and reread all of Karichi, and I'll laugh at the super Ichi fight scenes, but I'll also like just have to sit back and give a slow cap to some of those incredible like panels that he draw, like of the energy and the movement and the attitude. That's something where, you know, it fell into this gap generation that we're talking about, but the art didn't suffer because of it.
right.
And its success wasn't necessarily found, and it found some success, but it didn't like, man, it's something. And like we said, there's some great stuff in Fairy Tail, there's some great stuff in Toriko, but you can just tell that there's a tension there. Because there was that vacuum, and young artists and editors and everybody, they were thirsty to fill it because they were like, ooh.
Again, they were growing too fast. I mean, and I think some of the skill set wasn't there. Like in the same way, like, you know, like growing a good crop takes time. Like I think it's the same thing with like, I think if like the artist for Toriko and Fairy Tail had just been like, you need to slow down a little bit and like work on some stuff. I think they'd have been better for it.
Yeah. And you know what actually like kind of started this sort of trend towards where we are now? I think one of the standout manga and series that happened in this generation, for sure, in that lost generation, was Bakuman. I don't. You've read Bakuman, right?
So like, iShield 21, I would say, fell kind of in the golden age. Right, the big three.
That was right. That was the golden age sports manga. I don't know. That is a very fun statistic, actually. So iShield 21 is a sports manga, very shonen, very, you know, like, oh, you know, gotta be athletic, gotta be the best, gotta, you know, like win and understand what that means. But it was about American football.
Yeah.
Which was so interesting, because I remember when you told me the stat about that, when that manga came out, American football and its actual like rate of play in Japan went up by what, like 400%?
Yeah.
Because it was so low before.
Because it was in the most popular, you know, kids magazine to read.
Yes.
Like, you know?
And honestly, I'm not gonna pretend like I didn't learn a lot about football from that manga.
Oh, I did too.
I was not really aware of a lot of the rules, because I never really seriously watched football.
Which is really interesting. I know one of the big things in American football in Japan is trick plays.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is like because they do so many trick plays in iShield 21.
It's huge.
Hilarious. It's just great.
It's not about just smashing each other. And that one was interesting because, well, I mean, they talk about race in that one, which is interesting.
Yeah,
it's not handled perfectly at all, but I have to say it's handled, which is brave, which is really brave.
Well, and like, you know, talking to the writer and artist for Bakuman, I mean, they're conceptual people. Like, they came out kind of after they did iShield 21, and then kind of in this like kind of starting to tip the scales on the big three.
Yeah.
They wrote their own manga about a manga artist and a manga writer, you know, themselves. Basically.
And that was
and they did 140 chapters, but they really tackled a lot of commentary on like manga. So, you know, they had basically their representations of One Piece, Bleach, and Naruto there. And they talked about like them ending, and they talked about ending their own manga at their own time, because they wanted it to stand as a piece of art rather than, you know, kind of a mechanical function of Shounen Jump.
Exactly. And they quoted some really good numbers there. And that a lot of the comic that I'm writing today comes from the research that they were presenting in that comic. Like, they learned so much from writing iShield 21. It's very clear. And the art is there. It's so interesting that a manga about writing manga would still have such standout art.
It really does.
Like, it's just, I mean... Oh my god, I think that artist also wrote that one, like, Angel Hell Detective thing. Do you remember that short? It was like, I don't remember. It was like a really short manga, but again, the art was just, those guys they know what they're doing, and they can flat draw. So, what is it? You also told me they make sure to spend time outside.
Yeah, they do research. Like, the thing is, okay, so they're veteran manga writers. So in the way, like, they're not really comparable to, I would say, like, the writers of Fairy Tail and, like, Toriko, just in the sense that they are a veteran writer and illustrator team who've written successful mangas before, and they're coming back.
They did Death Note, right?
That's what I'm looking up
the
right
artist, now. The artist did that. They have to have some work on Death Note. Which,
I believe they do.
Yeah.
I believe the artist did Death Note, and I believe the artist is the one who did the redraw for One Punch Man as well.
Yes.
I believe it's all the same artist.
Yeah, so it's definitely like they know what they're doing, and Bakuman was just kind of like, it came out right in the middle of that gap generation and really said something about what was happening with art and the medium in that day. And it was exciting because I remember they had this one part where they talked about what it meant to write, and how the villain was this character who was using a conglomerate of writers to write. He was like outsourcing. He was like doing like he was what is it called when you have like a bunch of different people do the same thing? It's like an internet term, or like crowdsource, that's what it is. He was crowdsourcing writing manga, which was kind of talking about what was happening to some of the things in the industry where you have a lot of different people making this thing that's like, quote unquote, like perfect, because it's like, well, we've all decided on what is the average idea, which is the perfect idea for a viewer. And it really fought that with the manga characters doing research onto other manga and deciding, like, well, what kind of manga do we want to write? What is our impact as artists?
Yeah, they really had a high level, perspective on what they were doing, instead of like, again, like part of the problem with growing a manga too fast, like Toriko and Fairy Tail, I would say, was like growing pains. They didn't have time to kind of like hit pause and kind of like get at that 10,000 foot level and be like, what am I doing?
Yeah, take a deep breath. And that's part of the exciting part about some of those other manga artists. They're just jumping right in. Like they're like, give me a story, I want to draw, I want to get good. Like,
yeah, I would say talking about kind of the new stuff that's coming out, the new like I can now say there's a gap generation because I think we are in a new generation of shonen manga, and so like I want to talk about My Hero Academia a little bit.
Ooh, everybody does. I want to talk about
it. I watched the anime series. I brought it up to you. You watched it. I read the manga through what it was up at the time, and I remember like my first comment, like my first thought was like, I didn't think it'd be as big as it is now and resonate as well as it did. But I remember reading the manga and just thinking it was absolutely blisteringly fast.
Yeah,
way faster than Fairy Tail and Trico. But as like the anime is developing and like I'm thinking back, I'm like, this guy has a real good grasp of what he's doing.
Yes.
He really does. And I don't know if he's just crazy talented, if he came in with a plan, or if
I think it's a modern perspective. I think we can definitely say that's what happened.
Like, I think that's a lot of what it's adding.
He read what was happening, and I mean, we cannot for 1 minute like fault Toriko or Fairy Tail or Kenichi for being what they were. They were a reaction that was art that was a reaction of a vacuum that was created that was unprecedented.
Right.
So that was the art that got made during that time because of that time. But I think we're finally getting to art that is a reaction to that gap generation.
Exactly.
Which had never happened before. So this is the first time manga. This is kind of like the do or die moment where it has now evolved. Like where it's now hitting this new stage, and My Hero Academia is like, it's learning from the past. And I mean it's really cool. And like Bakuman was definitely a good example of how like it was.
I think it was a good predictor of how toxic the environment of the big three coming off was going to be,
and how the art form needed to look back and do some research and think about what it was doing. And I think the best perspective I got from Bakuman was they talked about One Piece once. They're like, well, do we want to write a comic like One Piece? Or do we want to write a comic like this or that? But when they said One Piece, they also said another one called Dai's Big Adventure.
Yep.
And I think I sat back and read all that, and I think that that's one of the most, like, perfect examples of, like, wow, like, a created and built story that you can feel, like, when you're reading Dai's Big Adventure, I mean, for God's sakes, it's called Dai's Big Adventure. Like, it's just clearly, like, the guy it's literally a reaction to Dragon Ball. This is, like, it's got to be before Dragon Ball Z or during Dragon Ball Z, because it's the main character is Kid Goku, like, but as a fantasy warrior. But what it does is really exciting because it's a fantasy story. Start, middle, finish, bam. And it's printed, made, clearly done for an audience, but upon reading it, I gained so much perspective about what writing a comic really is about. And that's what I got from Bakuman, which is what they were trying to say about comics.
No, I mean, like,
and then,
let's not kid ourselves. The writer and illustrator of Bakuman sat down and decided to make Bakuman because they wanted to leave a real big footprint on a generation of manga artists coming up.
Yeah, and I mean, I was definitely impacted by that, and I think definitely the writer of My Hero Academy definitely read Bakuman and was like, wow. Because one of the messages that you got from Bakuman, which is really exciting, is one of the best manga, the one that they kind of described as the best, the one that were like, oh, well, this is
gold standard.
This is gold standard, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to be known as. They said Nuragami Nero.
Yeah.
And I mean, Nuragami Nero,
which is very similar to their kind of style.
Exactly.
Definitely.
It's a detective story with a demon from hell, and it's got this nice little... I mean, I like it because it's got this weird, like, demon twist, and I'm all about demon twists, but it's very, very original, and it is not flinching about ending. You know, it's like, boom, boom, bam, it's done. It's not very long at all, is what I'm saying. And it's open-ended enough where, like, they could revisit if they want, but it does not beg to be reopened. So, them talking about that kind of story being the one that they want to tell, really put the whole thing in perspective, for me at least as an artist, about the kind of comic that I want to write. And I think that definitely helped a lot of people who are in the industry specifically. And the exciting part about My Hero Academy is it's clearly not designed to be, say, like a one-shot or like a story.
Right. You know, it is a continuing arc, like shonen. Yeah. I mean, it's what you want if you're coming off of, like, the big three. Yeah. Like, it is. And then, like, kind of the kind of the last emblematic one I kind of wanted to talk about that's new is Boruto. Yeah. So it's you know, it's just coming back with more Naruto. Yeah. You think, though, but, like, it's really interesting because the series makes a real just noted point that this is not more Naruto. I mean, the whole arc of the whole character of Boruto is, I'm living in my dad's shadow and I don't want to deal with that shit. And, like, it's the complete parable for, you know, Boruto is living in the Naruto manga shadow, and it doesn't want to deal, and, like, it's different.
It's different.
And I think it's so, you know, first of all, just seeing the anime, it's so fresh. It's bright colors, it pops.
It's new.
There's music, the lines are smoothing. And I think one of the most interesting things, too, just from a modern perspective of, like, you know, it's got that whole meta premise going on, which is great. It's about kids, so it's a younger thing. It's not doing that shonen thing of, like, yeah, like, you know, we're 21 now and we can be a little edgier. It's like, no, these are kids learning how to deal with kid issues and, like, losing their innocence and, like, moving forward.
It's very much like a kid could read this having not read Naruto.
Exactly.
And not want to read Naruto.
It's built to be kind of like, you know, it's almost built like the kids reading it are supposed to, their dads read Naruto.
Right.
And their dad's like, oh, read Boruto now. And they're like, Dad, you need to, like, get out of my, like, face. But even more interesting, I think, is the art style. Yeah. In the sense that, like, there are no Tsunades or Hinatas with giant breasts. Yeah. And, like, that just blew my mind because I was like, it's the same guy.
Yeah.
But he just was like, I'm an adult now. I'm telling a children's story. Like, I don't need to do this.
Exactly.
Like,
that's not the point.
And something even with the fights, like, they're kind of toned back down where it's like, no, like, this is
not
for
as much,
kids.
Not as much edgy blood. Like, he got to say that back in the, you know, back when they were fighting Zabuza.
Yeah, Sasuke was a great character back then. He's not in 2017.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work now. And I think that's really what we're talking about. It's just like, okay, like, it's 2017. We want to see art that is made for 2017. And that's why we're so excited about My Hero, because it's taking the trend of superheroes that is real and worldwide and approaching it through a manga format, through an anime format, and doing a really kick-ass job.
Exactly. It's kicking ass. And that's... It's super exciting to be so on board and so happy to, like, because one of the big things for anime nerds like us that is great about a very popular and positive shonen series is it allows us to begin sharing anime with people again.
Yeah.
My Hero Academia has brought so much new lifeblood back to kind of the anime and manga sphere that it's great. We can talk about it. You know, we finally have something to talk about with regular people again.
Yeah, I don't have to hold my friend's hand while I show them the first episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and tell them, no, trust me, there's a steamroller later, it's great.
Which is like again, JoJo's super modern, Dragon Ball super modern.
Yeah.
And is coming through with great stuff.
Super's incredible. But both of those things, JoJo and Super, they're produced in a modern concept, but they are still taking this sort of echo from their old school roots.
And, you know, JoJo's a very much, you know, kind of edgy, a little more avant-garde with its stuff. But I would say, like, Dragon Ball Super, I mean, the whole point of, like, what the current intro song that's on right now is, hey, I have these characters I created. Isn't it fun when we watch them do things? Let's make more fucking anime.
Exactly.
That is literally just what the song says at the beginning.
They say it, and it's so exciting because when you watch Super, I think what a couple people have a high expectation of what they want Dragon Ball to be because it was so electrifying in parts of its drama, but what is great about it is...
And when those people were children.
Yeah, exactly. There's that. But also, like, it does not for 1 minute lose its humor. It does not for 1 minute pretend to be anything other than, like, no, this, guys...
It's more Dragon Ball Super.
Yeah, like, it's Akira Toriyama. He's gonna write... The whole thing is a joke. It's always been a joke. It's always going to be a joke. That's why it's good. Because then you can sort of, like, balance it. And Akira Toriyama is only getting better. Like, he's a manga artist. He's one of the best, so he's not going to, like, lose his edge. That's the whole point. You write this many comics, you know how to do it. And the way that they're handling everything is really cool.
And on Dragon Ball, I think it's really interesting. You know, we talked about like Toriko Fairy Tail and stuff. Maybe kind of being super inspired by Dragon Ball and like kind of coming off of them. I think it's really interesting to point out that like even Dragon Ball started off with Bulma as the main character. Yeah. I mean, first panel is Bulma. The first whole arc is her.
She wants to find the Dragon Balls.
She finds Goku and is like nursing him into being a character for the first thing. And I think that's super interesting that like, you know, later series that kind of get pitched in 2014 miss like a step like including a female character in such a core way.
Right, yeah.
When something as like influential and core and old as Dragon Ball kind of did that thing. Yeah. I think that's interesting to look at too.
Exactly, that's 101 stuff character building wise, which just really speaks to how Kenichi, Toriko, and Fairy Tail were done because there was a hole. And they needed something to fill a hole. And, I mean, I really want to know the story behind the Toriko artist. Because if you read the first couple of chapters of Toriko, don't get me wrong, the thing's great. But he has got some, like, learning curves that he gets through. Toriko's original, like, Toriko's power, of course, is the nail gun, where he absorbs energy into his left hand. And his hit then has, like, echo hits or whatever. The way he drew it initially was this hand just sort of like ballooning out, like with sort of no concept of what perspective or anatomy was, which was exciting and fun, but you could see how shaky it was.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think fundamentally, like, manga is always going to be about growth. And the flaws are what make the good things. You don't get a My Hero without this gap generation to teach the manga artists that My Hero is what the industry wants and needs.
Right.
That's really what it is.
No, and kind of with the Gap generation, like I'd really love to see Toriko and like Fairy Tail and those artists come back with another story. Like that would be so exciting.
No, yeah, they need to like sort of decide that what they did then was a reaction to that time, and I'd love to see their art now as a reaction to you know, time itself.
But I think that's where we're gonna leave it, guys.
Yeah, that's gonna be a KO. That was fun. Always fun to talk about our thoughts. But yeah, this one definitely struck a good chord with us. So yeah, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Did we miss your particular favorite?
Yeah, what do you guys think of the Gap generation?
Yeah, what are you thinking of?
Anything, any like hidden gems there you remember? I know, like, what was it? I was thinking of like Free coming out, and then like Yuri on Ice coming out and just creaming it as far as like as what was supposed to be later. But anyway, leave any other thoughts you guys have below, and make sure to like and subscribe, guys. We appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time.
Kabam!